of the world, a reputation that lasted only a decade. Hear the fascinating true story on Bygone Jacks, Our Unsung History, a podcast from WJCT Public Media.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. It's Friday, which means we're talking about the week's biggest headlines with our panel of journalists. Among our topics today, a dark chapter in city politics ends with prison time for JEA's former CEO. St. Johns County voters see ghost candidates at the polls. A massive seabird die-off is explained. A murdered mother of 10 is remembered in a proposed hate crimes bill. And a look at what Mayor Deegan has done as she hits her one-year mark. Later, architectural historian Dr. Wayne Wood shares the story behind 15-odd Art Deco architectural curiosities. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email coastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Hiring slowed last month as U.S. employers added 114,000 jobs, according to the Labor Department. NPR's Scott Horsley reports the unemployment rate increased to 4.3%.
The pace of hiring in July was noticeably slower than the average over the last 12 months. Job gains for May and June were also revised downward. Hiring continued in healthcare, hospitality, and construction. Factory employment was roughly flat during the month, while the information sector lost jobs. At 4.3%, the unemployment rate is the highest it's been in more than 2.5 years. More than 400,000 people joined or rejoined the workforce last month, and not all of them found jobs right away. The Federal Reserve has described the job market as normalizing after a period of rapid growth, although Fed officials are on the lookout for signs of a more worrisome slowdown. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
3 Americans released in a multinational prisoner swap have arrived in San Antonio, Texas. They'll get medical checkups at an Army base there. But their first stop on U.S. soil was last night at Joint Base Andrews, just outside Washington. NPR's Dave Mistich says that's where they were greeted by President Biden and Vice President Harris.
Journalists Evan Gerskovich and Alsu Kurmasheva and former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan stepped off the plane, embraced Biden and Harris, and then reunited with family members who had lobbied for their return. Gerskovich was detained in March 2023 while on assignment for the Wall Street Journal. Kurmasheva, a Russian-American citizen, was captured in June that same year while attempting to return home after taking care of her mother. Whelan had been detained in late 2018. Western officials viewed each of their charges as trumped up and illegitimate.
NPR's Dave Mistich reporting. The political leader of the Palestinian group Hamas was buried in Qatar today. This followed traditional Friday prayers that drew other exiled Hamas leaders, Qatar's ruler, and senior officials from Turkey. NPR's Aya Batrawi reports his wooden casket was draped in the Palestinian flag as allies in Lebanon and Yemen held large prayers for him.
Hamas says Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in a brazen Israeli attack while visiting Iran on Wednesday. Iran has vowed to avenge that strike on its soil. Haniyeh had led Hamas's political leadership from exile in Qatar. He was the lead Hamas figure in negotiations for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, where the health ministry says the death toll is nearing at least 40,000 Palestinians killed, among them several of Haniyeh's children and grandchildren. President Biden has said his killing doesn't help those ceasefire efforts. But prominent as he was, Haniyeh ultimately wasn't the man calling the shots in those talks, nor is he believed to have spearheaded the deadly Hamas-led October 7th attacks on Israel. That would be Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's leader inside Gaza, still at large. Aya Batrawi, NPR News.
This is NPR News from Washington.
On WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Despite the primary and general elections happening soon, elections officials are still encouraging you to sign up to be a poll worker if you're interested. Ben Hovland is the chair of the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission, a bipartisan panel that helps local elections offices. Hovland says by now most poll worker positions are probably filled, but some workers might drop out, and you could be called up.
At the end of the day, what it really boils down to is we can't run elections without poll workers. There's not, you don't have polling places if you don't have poll workers.
And for more information, you can go to duvalelections.gov. If you are planning to go out of the country and you need a passport, St. Johns County has you covered this weekend. The county's Passport Saturday event is designed for first-time passport applicants and for people whose previous passport was lost or stolen or issued more than 15 years ago. That event starts at 8:30 tomorrow morning at the Richard O. Watson Judicial Center on Lewis Speedway in St. Augustine. That's from 8:30 to 1:30. To apply, you do need to bring a valid government ID, a birth certificate, and any previously issued passports or naturalization certificates. 60% chance of a thunderstorm today after 5 p.m. Temperatures will be in the low to mid-90s. We have a heat advisory in effect today from 2 to 5 p.m. 70% chance tomorrow.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Amazon Business, committed to being a digital purchasing solution for businesses so that growing the business is the main focus and not admin and paperwork. Learn about smart business buying at amazonbusiness.com.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics, JEA's CEO is headed to federal prison. 4 spoiler candidates in St. Johns County share a common connection. Migratory bird deaths are linked to ocean plastics. A hate crimes bill is named for a local civil rights martyr, and Mayor Donna Deegan reflects on her first year in office. To talk about all of that, I'm joined by Noah Hertz, reporter for Jacksonville Today, Annette Gutierrez, reporter at Action News, and Maxwell, investigative reporter at News4Jax, and Ashley Harding, reporter at News4Jax. Good morning to all of you, and anchor, I should say, at News4Jax.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
But before we get started, we're joined on the line by Will Brown. He's a race and poverty reporter at Jacksonville Today. And Will, you are in Chicago at NABJ. That's the annual conference held by the National Association of Black Journalists. And we know that event has been in the headlines because of an appearance this week by Donald Trump. In that case, you had a literal front row to history, Will. You were in that room before and after his comments about presidential candidate Kamala Harris. Tell us about what happened, Will. What was the mood in that room kind of before, during, and after those comments?
Well, good morning, Ann. The mood was charged from the outset. The event began more than an hour late. The former president insinuated it was because of audio issues, but that was absolutely not true. The events, my understanding is the events began late because there were concerns the former president did not want to be fact-checked in real time. And I can say that I saw the executive director of the National Association of Black Journalists, the president of the National Association of Black Journalists, and the chair of the political task force, the woman who invited former President Donald Trump, former Times Union reporter and current Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter Tia Mitchell, all furiously trying to get the former president onto the stage. Eventually, he did come onto the stage, and when he did, the room was very charged. The former president was there was contempt from the former president to the journalists in the room, as well as to the 2 of 3 moderators on stage, particularly Rachel Scott from ABC News. And then um, once he started speaking, I would say even contempt from the people in the audience to the former president because of the discernible and fantastic falsehoods that he said on stage.
I want to ask, what do you mean by he didn't want to be fact checked in real time? What is that? What are you referring to?
So NABJ worked alongside PolitiFact to on the live stream share information, factual information in real time. So as the former president spoke, there were to be some fact checks. I don't know how that particularly worked out because I was literally in the front row and wasn't watching on a screen. But PolitiFact was in fact checking the things that the former president was saying in real time to ensure accuracy. And my understanding is that was a sticking point between the former president and us as NABJ members.
Interesting. And so obviously this has been talked a lot about nationally, certainly on social media. So after these comments were made about the vice president, what kind of conversations were you hearing at the conference?
A lot of them were, I'll share this with other people, kind of conversations. But there were some things that were, frankly, laughed at. The idea that former President Harris decided to become Black later in life was being laughed at to his face because, the vice president is someone who not only attended Howard University, which is one of the best historically Black colleges in the country. She pledged Alpha Kappa Alpha, which is the oldest Black sorority in the United States and has more than 250,000 members across the world. And to pledge Alpha chapter of AKA at Howard is a massive accomplishment. And yes, AKA does have some people who are not Black, but there are very, very, very few non-Black folks who cross that sorority at Howard University. So that was something that the audience, frankly, laughed at the former president about because we all knew that to be absolutely not true. And, people might not always know about Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, but even locally, they're like 400 members. And just this summer raised $250,000 for scholarships and people in underserved communities in Jacksonville. So that organization has been around for decades in a lot of these towns, and it's a majority Black woman-led organization. So that was something that the former president was frankly laughed at. And then when, the former president said he'd done more for Black folks since Lincoln, it was almost like this competition for some of the people I spoke with to list presidents who have done more for Black folks than the former president, whether that was Eisenhower signing the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which established the civil rights section of the Justice Department. That's what someone told me. In a conversation, FDR was another one who was mentioned. Lyndon Johnson was another one who was mentioned because he signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And then, of course, President Barack Obama was an example of what is possible for Black Americans. And so it was almost like a competition of naming presidents who have obviously, through accomplishment, done more for Black Americans than former President Trump.
It's interesting. Well, Will Brown, you're at NABJ in Chicago. We'll let you get back to the conference, but thanks so much for joining us and letting us know about that, about how that went down at the conference.
Thanks for joining me. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So let's move on now to talk about the biggest headline here this week, which was sentencing in the JEA corruption case. The former CEO sentenced to jail. If you want to join our conversation, you can call us at 904-549-2937, or you can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also join us on social media. You can tag us on social media. You can watch our live stream now on Facebook or YouTube. Ann Maxwell, you went to federal court this week for this sentencing. You were in the courtroom. A lot of people consider this the endpoint of this 5 to 6 year journey that this entire city went on, reluctantly. But what was the mood like in the courtroom?
Yeah, it's always a heavy mood when years of somebody's life is hanging in the balance. And so there's lots of people in the courtroom this Tuesday when the sentencing happened that were supporting Aaron Zahn, his family and friends. But of course, this is also of enormous public consequence for the people of Jacksonville, the ratepayers of JEA, who've been following this scandal for years. And the judge really kind of wrapped it up with a bow.
Yeah, and so there were a lot of supporters there, family members, a packed courtroom. I mean, I know your colleague, former colleague Jim Pickett was there. He actually gave up his seat so some family members could be there, but it was and some even seated in the jury box.
That's right, and they brought chairs into the aisle. So a lot of observers there, and there were 6 witnesses, I believe, testifying in support of Aaron Zahn. Family, friends, his mother, his wife spoke. They testified about how devastating it would be to their families if he went to prison. His defense was arguing for probation, and then on the other side, you had the prosecutor speak and an attorney speak for JEA about the devastating consequences to the public, to the utility.
Yeah. And Ashley Harding, we did not hear from Aaron Zahn. His attorney said that, they're going to appeal this verdict, and they advised him not to speak. Do you think that the community was expecting anything in the way of an apology or an acknowledgement of what was done?
I mean, it would have, frankly, I think it would have been nice to hear those things, because you have to think back. This started in 2019, and then the pandemic happened. And Aaron Zahn outside the courthouse, with Jim Piggott, we heard them say, it's been a long 5 years. The city has wanted some resolution to this. This is going back a long time. And I can't get into the mind of Aaron Zahn, of course, but I feel like the city, the taxpayers of Duval County wanted to hear something, because this did go on for a long time. It was something that the city had to deal with, what people had to deal with. And when you really think about what could have happened to all of us, really, if JEA had been sold and privatized, it's insane. It's crazy to think about what the repercussions could have been.
Annette Gutierrez, 4 years was the sentence ultimately handed down by this judge. The government had asked for 5. He could have gotten up to 25, although the recommendation from the pre-sentencing report was 9 years. Does 4 years seem sufficient to the people in the community that you're hearing from?
I'm actually relatively new to the Jacksonville area, so I just started to catch on to this story. And I mean, it's absolutely insane to hear about this mass corruption for the city of Jacksonville. And I think a lot of people were surprised about what could have happened to their pockets, right? And, when I heard from his attorney about how saying 4 years, it seems like enough because it's a white-collar crime, and I think he thinks, I don't deserve to be in timeout. He's like, I already suffered. He was asking for probation. He was like, my family has suffered enough. But I think this 4 years is to show to the whole, city of Jacksonville that, there's corruption in the city and you need to serve some form of time. Obviously you did something wrong and, you were convicted, and now you need to suffer some form of consequence. So I think 4 years definitely, I think it's enough. I do, because he did do something wrong to the city of Jacksonville.
Yeah, and in terms of, we heard from the family and reasons why they said he should not be incarcerated, but we did hear from JEA's attorney, and he pushed back on the idea that this was, something that had not gone through. Therefore, there was sort of no harm done, but he actually calculated an actual out-of-pocket cost.
Right. So to back up a little, the defense attorneys were saying, no money was actually stolen, nobody was actually harmed here. And as you mentioned, Anne, we heard from the attorney for JEA saying that's not true. $76 million hit because of this scandal. I believe $63 million of that was because of increased financing costs, because the credit rating for JEA had been downgraded because of Aaron Zahn's actions, he said, which made borrowing money more expensive. And then he also noted $13 million was spent on vendors to try to get the company or the utility sold. So, that's law firms, consultants brought in for, what the jury ultimately found was a fraudulent, deceitful act.
And Noah Hertz, there obviously is a process in our criminal justice system. Anybody that has watched federal prosecutions will probably remember former Congresswoman Corinne Brown, who was convicted by the same prosecutor for corruption, but her case was later overturned on appeal. And so, there is no necessarily a final moment, even though this seems to bring some closure to the city.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the calls of corruption ring particularly interesting given all of the things that are going on right now, especially with the elections, and all of these people have extra eyes on not just candidates, but also things that are going on like this with the ongoing JEA issue.
And you've been doing reporting, Noah, on candidates and on the election in St. Johns County. So perhaps let's shift gears to talk about that a little bit. You focus on St. Johns County. I mean, that's your beat at Jacksonville Today. But you have done some reporting about ghost candidates. Explain to us what a ghost candidate is and what you found about these 4 particular candidates in St. Johns County.
So this charge of ghost candidates comes from not exactly looking at these specific candidates, but these candidates, these 4 candidates in specific that we're talking about this morning, follow a pattern that when I spoke to Ben Wilcox, who is the research director over at a nonprofit research institute in Tallahassee called Florida Integrity that specifically follows candidates like this. These are some of the aspects of candidacy that he called out as being classically associated with what they call ghost candidates. And what I mean is I'm looking chiefly at the races for St. Johns County Commission, which are really tight. These are local elections. Because of the way Florida's primary system works and a couple of these candidates and the way they're running, it has locked down the primaries so that only Republicans are going to be able to vote in these races. And because of that, they will be functionally decided in August. These races will not make it to the November election. By the time people who aren't registered Republicans see these races on their November ballot, their options are going to be whoever was selected in the August primary and either a blank box for a write-in candidate or in one race's case, a single non-party affiliated candidate who hasn't really been doing a whole lot of campaigning either. But I'll back it up. The 4 candidates who I've been following, 2 of whom are in the District 1 County Commission race, 1 of whom is in the District 3 race, and 1 of whom is in the District 5 race. Some are running as write-in candidates, some are running as Republicans, but the connection that all these people share is that they are all either employed by or have family members who work at this little marketing agency that's based in St. Augustine. That marketing agency itself, the individual who owns it, shares some connections with one of the largest home building companies that is based in Northeast Florida and that also works nationwide. And these individuals who are running for office, particularly the 2 Republicans who are running as these, ghost candidates. And like I said, that means they're not campaigning. That means they have barely any information about their candidacy out there. They are running and they have ties through their campaign treasurers who they've appointed to PACs that are supporting the incumbent candidates who they were running against. So it's this really interesting dynamic of, and this is one of the things that was interesting that Ben Wilcox over at Florida Integrity said to me, was you end up with candidates in these races who are really just there to confuse voters, where there are so many mailers and ads going on right now about these St. Johns County races. If you're a person living in one of these really hotly contested districts, you are getting berated with ads. And there is a non-zero chance that when you get to election day, you're going to go into the ballot box and you might go, well, I've seen tons of negative ads about this person, tons of negative ads about this person. I've never seen any ads about this person, and they're a Republican. I'm going to vote for them. And when the average turnout for a primary election in St. John's is sub 30%, all you need is a couple hundred people, maybe not even that many, to make a decision like that to potentially swing an election in one way or another.
So the candidates that are running as ghost candidates, there's sort of a split in the Republican Party right now in St. Johns County. You have the Republican Executive Committee, traditionally the spokes voice for candidates representing Republicans, but you also have a subgroup that is associated with Donald Trump, and basically you have the incumbents, the 3 Republican incumbents, being supported by this kind of Trump-aligned group, And the Republican Executive Committee is actually backing 3 challengers to 3 seated Republicans. So it's a really unusual situation in St. Johns County. Obviously, St. Johns County is overwhelmingly Republican. Democrats don't field any candidates in any of these races. So you have, a Republican Executive Committee that's fighting its own incumbents.
Yeah, there are more than double the number of Republicans in St. Johns County as there are registered Democrats. So it's a given that a Republican is going to win in these races, and that's also in part there is no Democrats running in every single one of these races except for one school board race. But because of that,
which are nonpartisan, we should say. So
exactly, which are nonpartisan, yes. But it's interesting because people tend to think in more purple areas and that's not to say that St. Johns County does not have areas that are purple, but in areas where there are a larger contingent from both political parties, they tend to think that each political party is a monolith. And I think what we're seeing in parts of St. Johns County is sort of similar to what we see on the national stage, where there are these different factions of the individual political parties. And in St. Johns County, the big thing that it comes down to is growth and development. You've got one part of the Republican Party that says, look, the people who are on the county commission now are to blame for how fast this area has grown, for how out of control the development is, and we need to get them off. And then you've got the other contingent of the Republican Party that says, look, this stuff was set into motion long before some of these people got on the county commission. You can't just blame these individuals. And so that's where you get a split of groups like the Trump Club for St. Johns County and there's another organization called the Conservative Coalition for St. Johns County are throwing all of their weight behind the incumbent candidates. And it's worth noting that those incumbent candidates have also received a lot of support from developers, from people within the development, real estate, land owning realm. And then you've got these 3 candidates who are being supported by the local Republican Party. And this has drawn a lot of ire to the local Republican Party, but these are individuals who, whether they will be able to keep that promise if they were elected, because of the way land development works in Florida and the interests that people are beholden to, they say that if you elect me, I am going to say no to a lot of these developments. I will create a coalition with the other people that I would be elected with, and we would just say no to these things.
It's fascinating. It's kind of a debate that I've witnessed going on and on for decades in St. Johns County. But thanks for your reporting on that, Noah. And you can find his story at Jacksonville Today on those ghost candidates if you want to know more about who they are and who they're aligned with. We're talking about the week's biggest headlines with our reporter panel, Noah Hertz, Ashley Harding, Ann Maxwell, and Annette Gutierrez. You can join our conversation at 904-549-2937. Annette, I want to move on to a story that you've covered about a massive seabird die-off. Remind us how this began and what ultimately was found to have happened.
Right. So at the end of June, we had started to see a lot of Facebook posts and a lot of viewers reaching out to us saying, hey, there's a dead bird, what appears to be a dead bird along the beach. And then it wasn't just one, it was hundreds. And so one of the local rehabs in St. Augustine, Ark Wildlife Rescue and Rehab, they said they had received over 200 calls in a matter of 3 days at the end of June.
And this was like primarily Jacksonville Beach or up and down?
This was as far as like the border of Georgia and Jacksonville, right? And Florida, and then all the way down to as far down as Marion County. Okay. But then I recently learned, I actually spoke just last week with the Florida Wildlife Hospital of Brevard County, that they were having birds all along their shores too. So, I mean, I would say it's pretty much along the coast of Florida.
And what kind of birds were they?
These are shearwater birds, and they're mainly migratory birds. So most of their time is spent overseas flying. So they don't usually land unless they're going to breed. This is what a veterinarian was telling me. So when they washed up along the shore, this was part of their normal migratory pattern because they come from South America and they travel upwards through the Atlantic. So it's normal to see them around this time of year to breed potentially, but there was a large weather event overseas. I think we remember talking about it. I'm not sure.
Huge winds.
High winds and all of that. And so, they said that it's normal to see some of them get washed along the shore, but what they recently found through the necropsies, which is basically like an autopsy for the animals, for the birds, they found that there was some plastic debris inside their stomachs. So they were already very debilitated, very weakened from having their stomachs inflamed by what they found, plastic.
And it wasn't just some. I think that in talking to some of the veterinarians or the experts at the wildlife agency, they were saying these birds were actually impacted, that their digestive system was clogged.
Right, exactly. And you can imagine what that might feel like, especially for this little animal. So they weather the storms all the time, but they weren't strong enough to weather these storms. So it was an excessive number of birds that ended up washing along the shore because of this weather event. They said what happened was mainly because of the weather event, but having their stomachs inflamed is just, they weren't able to fight it. And, if you came across them, I actually came across one, and their heads were lolled, they were just not flapping their wings, their eyes were barely open, and I mean, it looked like it was dying in front of you, and nobody wants to see that when you're walking along the beautiful beaches of Jacksonville and Neptune Beach, Atlantic, and all of that. So they said, when I spoke with the expert, they were like, if we want to prevent something like this from happening, we need to do better to pick up the plastic, keep it away from the shores. I know some restaurants, they have the paper straws, and that's, one way to help. And we want to recycle. And if you're going to go to the beach, don't use these plastic water bottles. Use your reusable ones.
Yeah.
So those are just some ways.
And I mean, you think about these birds, they're on a 6,000-mile journey. So a kind of unimaginable, physical feat that they're accomplishing. But plastics are a problem that you see on the beach as much or more than birds these days. Even if it's not an entire bottle of something, the fragments of plastics are just about everywhere.
Yeah, it's such a shame. I mean, this is a disturbing story to me, and really makes you think twice, like you said, Annette, about taking your plastic to the beach. I mean, or I guess, you wonder if it comes from the landfills somehow into the water. I mean, it just kind of gives you kind of a pit in your stomach.
I mean, the plastic pollution, I think more and more is recognized as something that just persists. I think that the EPA said that 100% of plastics that were created by humans continue to exist to this day, that there just is they don't disappear, they don't break down. Some small percentage can be recycled.
Absolutely. And frankly, it's just being a good person. It's being a good neighbor. We have our beaches, beautiful beaches. We have these beautiful animals that are in the water, in the sky. I mean, what is so hard about recycling this or using something alternative? And very good reporting, by the way. So, Annette, let me just say, I don't think it's a big ask to consider and look beyond yourself. We should care about Mother Earth. We should care about our beaches. We only get them to enjoy them. I mean, anything can happen. Mm-hmm. And I can please continue that reporting, because this is, and something, when you were telling that story, I actually thought back to something I saw. If you buy a 6-pack or 6 cans of soda, they're all mushed together with that, I don't know how to describe it.
That
The plastic,
ring.
The rings, yes. I saw a picture once of a turtle that was caught in the actual circular portion of that ring, and his shell almost went interior. Like, I don't know how to describe it over the radio, because you know what I'm talking about, but
I can kind of
you see what I'm
picture it.
talking about? Yeah, he looked deformed, honestly.
Yeah.
And it was really heartbreaking. And in a case like that, take some scissors, cut those, and dispose of it properly.
Yeah. And Annette, I mean, I think it's increasing pressure for people who are manufacturing these things to produce a different kind of, way of packaging, as opposed to it all being on the consumer to make sure that everything is recycled and disposed of properly, that there should be some pressure at the origin.
For sure. I definitely think like you said, if we can stop it from being this and maybe just being a container of some kind to be put in, I think that will help. I think every little bit helps. The beach cleanups, that helps. Even the city, they said, I spoke to some beachgoers who said that those trash cans that are there along the shores, people throw it away, but then if there's a burst of wind, now all of it's in the sea.
Right.
So, I mean, they're like, maybe we should have the city collect those cans more often, so that way they can, put the trash away from the water. So there's just a lot of little things that we can do, and I think the distributors is definitely a big thing. Everybody has a part in this role of making sure we protect our environment.
We're talking about the week's biggest stories with our panel of journalists. I want to move on now, Ashley, to a story that you worked on, a proposal to name a planned hate crimes bill, or a proposed hate crimes bill, after a civil rights martyr named Johnny Mae Chappelle. Remind us who she is.
Yeah, Johnny Mae Chappelle, she lived in Jacksonville. She was a wife and mother. It was the 1960s. It was 1964. The story goes that she was, I believe she had gone to get ice cream for her children. I could see any mom doing that. She was walking back to her home with her groceries, and she realized she didn't have her money, her wallet, billfold, whatever it was. So she was retracing her steps right there at Flicker Avenue and New Kings Road. And she was going back looking for her wallet. And that's when a group of men in a car pulled up to her and shot her. And the story goes is that they were there to kill a black person. It was clearly racially motivated. They didn't stop for 1 second to think about her life, the family she was leaving behind. I believe she left behind 10 children, and the youngest was 4 months old. And at News4Jax, in the last few years, we did talk to that man. He's still alive. He never knew his mother. And the thing that personally breaks my heart is that the only known photo of her is one of her in the morgue and her husband's looking down at her body. I can't think of anything so dehumanizing. And,
and that's the only photo that they have of each other and of her is her laying on that table.
Right. And, it's hard to want to share that picture in our news reporting, but we warn our viewers what this is, but we can't not show Johnny Mae Chappelle. She was a life. She was a person. She mattered. And the bottom line is that, over the last couple of years, we've seen instances of hate crimes. We've seen hate literature. We've seen flyers in multiple neighborhoods. We saw the projections on the side of the stadium. So there is this proposed anti-hate crime bill here in Jacksonville, and it is somewhat different from the state laws. And specifically, one of the main things that it addresses litter, which is that literature we're talking about. And
racist literature.
Racist literature, exactly. Councilman Jimmy Peluso was really behind this. And as far as an amendment to name it for Johnny Mae Chappelle, he told me that it was Councilman Rockman Johnson who really came to him and said, this is the right thing to do. It's important to remember her story and remember the life that she had and the life that many of us would grieve.
It's important to note that picture that she mentions, Anne, was actually ran in Jet magazine, and that was this period of intense racial turmoil in this country. A magazine that had also run that infamous picture of Emmett Till, but in both cases to highlight the racial violence that was happening in this country. The legacy of her murder, I think, has always been unfortunate. Why she's considered a civil rights martyr, because out of the 4 men who were responsible for that murder, only one was prosecuted and only served 3 years in prison. So that's a legacy that I think is one that this city still struggles to deal with.
Right, and that's some 60 years ago or so. And I mean, the fact that Johnny Mae Chappelle's youngest son is still alive, just kind of shows the continuity of history. You can never really escape it. And I think attaching her legacy to this bill is a way to bring up that history again and look at it, and however painful it may be, and realize we can't escape the past, and it's something you have to consider as you live your life now.
Yeah. And Noah, we should note, though, this bill is not pen passed yet. There may also be a political element to this choice of the naming, because there has been pushback from city council members who say this bill isn't necessary, including Terrence Freeman, who was a black city council member. He said he found it offensive. He thought it was political pandering. Rory Diamond also says it's unnecessary. We already have protections in place. And so does it make it more difficult for council members to vote against a bill when it's named for someone like Johnny Mae Chappelle?
I think that's certainly an element of it that they'll be considering when they vote on this, but I think it's so much bigger than that as well, because it is part of this ongoing conversation that everyone in this country is having, but Northeast Florida has been having it over and over and over again about what our legacy is, what the history of these incredibly racist events is. I mean, I think it's not the same, but I think it's not even all that dissimilar from the ongoing conversation to try and get the state's Black History Museum in St. Johns County. I mean, this is where my brain goes to because I've been paying attention to this and I've been following it. But there have been repeated instances at county commission meetings during the public comment period where people will come up, and it's funny because this is such a popular project. This is such a popular initiative among a lot of people to bring something to this area that has such a fraught history with racist violence against Black individuals specifically, to honor these people, to make people aware of this history. And every couple of weeks at St. Johns County Commission meetings, you still have people who will say, like, why do we need this? Does this cost us money? What is the point of this? Why is it doing this? And I think it's reasonable for members of the community to ask those questions and to ask, are my tax dollars being spent in a way that I think is being a good steward of them? But it's anytime you have these kinds of conversations about these things, it does immediately bring up the people who are not so ready to just jump on board immediately and go, let's go for it.
Yeah. And Ashley, you note that this bill was proposed by Jimmy Peluso, city council member, and it was really a direct reaction to the sense that something needed to be done. It was right in the wake of the Dollar General shooting.
It was. And, it's hard to believe we're actually about to be up 1 year of that. I believe it's this month, actually.
August 26th. I
Yeah,
think it's August 26th.
Yeah, we're almost there. And I just know that there were so many conversations after that happened because it was very evident what the gunman's motive was. The Sheriff T.K. Waters did not mince words. We heard it directly from him. And I think it elicited a lot of conversations about what this city is. This is a diverse city. If you really look at the people in Jacksonville, this is a very diverse community. And frankly, I think it's a beautiful thing to see so many people of different backgrounds. And, Councilman Peluso said to me, this is about sending a message of who we are, that hate's not welcome here. Do we have an ugly history? Yes. Yes, we do. I think it would be remiss to say otherwise. A lot of communities do as well, but it's also about today, moving forward, acknowledging, and also sending a loud message.
Yeah. And Annette, that, is a time this would increase penalties for things like throwing leaflets on someone's lawn that are racist. It increases those penalties, but those are things that we've been seeing a real increase in terms of flyers, projections on buildings of, anti-Semitic phrases or imagery. There really has been, a noticeable increase.
Right. What happened to Massey? I mean, that was years ago. I'm sorry. Sonia Massey was actually just happened, but the story that you covered, that was decades ago. And we are still seeing these projections, these hate crimes. Actually, I recently did a story. It was a little different. There was a private business owner who put a Nazi flag in front of his business. And, while it's private and technically he is allowed to do that, I spoke to some people around and they were very disturbed. I mean, the Nazi flag is a symbol of hate. And so, that's a symbol of hate for the people, for the Jewish people. But, I spoke with a Black gentleman who said, this is hurtful to me too. I mean, there are different forms of hate. And I think it's definitely still important for our local legislation to do something to stop these hate crimes. Because, they send bad messages, the projections, the flyers. We all are disturbed by it. I'm not Jewish, but it's hurtful. It's a symbol of hate, and we don't like to see that.
Right. Well, I want to move on to another topic that you sat down with the mayor for her first year anniversary, Ashley, and kind of looking back at what she's accomplished and also at her proposed budget for this next coming year. So what was she hearing and what are you hearing from residents? You kind of brought their questions to her.
Yeah, a lot of people had really good questions. And I wish we could have had more time with her because we had a lot to get through and you know what? I enjoyed that because it shows that the people in our community are engaged. Our viewers are engaged on all fronts, in all facets of local media. And, someone asked about the septic tanks. That's a phase-out program that's been going on for a while now. She broke down how that works, and she said, admittedly, that's not moving as quickly as she would like. People also asked, hey, what's going on with this conversation about a new jail? And that's been a topic for a while too, and that's going to be a process. There's so much more than just where would it go. It's like the mayor said, who's going to build it? Of course, these are all these things that need to be brought up.
And is the city going to own it, or are they going to have someone else build it and lease it back, which is an interesting idea.
Right. And at the same time, we've heard the sheriff say that the conversation is to move that admin building too. So this is a multi-tiered project. But, she talked about how one of her biggest thing, right up there with public safety is infrastructure. We have issues with infrastructure in Jacksonville. We hear people say all the time, what's going on with these potholes? What's going on with this, that, the other? And, we also talked about the stadium deal, of course. That was a big, big home run. But something, another big part of that, though, as we know, is the community benefits agreement, which was separated from the stadium deal. And, a special committee is looking at it now. And I don't know if you ladies have had the opportunity, but when we go to the east side, man, those people are so engaged. They are following this closely. And what I've really, and this is something I enjoy about the job that we do, we get to go out there and talk to people that otherwise we wouldn't get the opportunity to, and really see and experience our neighbors. And these are business owners. We talked to a woman who owns a t-shirt making business. We talked to a lady who owns a restaurant. Women bosses, just going to throw that out there. But, they're paying attention to this. They want to see their businesses thrive. They want to see their neighbors thrive. And a lot of these people have lived there for generations. One lady I talked to, she's like a fourth generation east side, out east. And, I feel like many of them wear it with pride, but they want to see the promises, the broken promises of consolidation remedied.
And one of the things that Ashley pointed out in her reporting and that the mayor noted was that this is the fourth fastest growing city in the county, in the country. And I wonder, there's something about Jacksonville that I think maybe that doesn't necessarily read when you look at the city. I don't know that it has that feel. There's always been this frustration about the pace of downtown development or redevelopment. So it's a city that's growing, but it maybe doesn't feel as dynamic as that sounds.
Yeah, I mean, you look at like the school district, fewer kids are going to public schools in Jacksonville, which would seem to indicate otherwise, even though more children are going to charter schools, private schools, things like that. Downtown, struggles to develop it there. I mean, that's good to hear, though, that it's the fourth largest growing in the nation. And I think that's really a good reminder of just how widespread, Duval County is. It's bigger than just these issues, we talk about in the news every day. People are out there living their lives, having families, businesses here. So, I mean, that's really great to hear.
And Annette, this is going to be, despite all of that, a tight budget year for this mayor. I mean, this is not the budget that she hoped to have. It's less, the revenues are less than forecast. And so she's going to have to be reprioritizing and tightening the belt.
That's right. I mean, she really wants to be aggressive with how she wants to help change Jacksonville, but she needs to find the right approach to get the job done. I mean, we were talking, I went to the JSO town hall and they said they're hoping to get a lot more money so that they can have more officers on the streets to protect our city. And, this is part of her budget, and she really wants to participate in helping the city grow, but also be safer. And so, I mean, I know she just has to be strategic. I know she has a lot of people in her corner helping her navigate how to best approach this budget. But I think the way she's approaching it, it seems to be good. And I think a lot of people are backing her up with this, too, just from what I've heard.
I thought a fascinating note, too, Ashley, was that she said that since they've brought back pensions, they've seen an 88% increase in applications for law enforcement. That blew my mind.
It blew my mind also. I thought, wow. It goes to show you that police officers, anybody who works in law enforcement, they have families at home to take care of. They also want to think about their futures. But something, if Jacksonville is growing, we're going to need those officers. And that's something I talked to the sheriff about on the day of the budget's presentation. He says, we need to make sure that these areas are covered.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
Well, I want to end the show on a happy note. Anne, Maxwell, you have a delightful piece of news from last night. Will you share it with us?
Yeah, so my cousin, second cousin, but she's still my cousin, Kate Douglas, took home a gold medal in the Olympics yesterday. We're so excited.
Fabulous.
Wow.
200-meter breaststroke. She broke her own U.S. record, I believe, in that swim. And we're all just over the moon in my family.
Incredible.
It's- yeah,
So exciting.
Kate
I
Douglas,
can't even imagine.
This was the 200-meter breaststroke?
I think so. Something meter breaststroke. It was breaststroke. 4
Well,
laps, whatever that is.
That's fabulous. And congrats to her. Thanks to all of you, Noah Hertz, Ashley Harding, Annette Gutierrez, and Maxwell. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
thanks,
thank
Anne.
you.
Thank you.
It was fun.
Up next, the real story behind this strange collection of Art Deco homes on the Trout River.
Sing Out Loud Festival presents the Live Wildly Showcase with Eric Church, Noah Kahn, Ryan Bingham, Nora Jones, and more. September 21st and 22nd in downtown St. Augustine. More information at singoutloudfestival.com.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. Serious injury cases are complex, and civil trial attorneys present the evidence juries need to see and hear. More at waynehogan.law.
On the next Florida Roundup, 3 Florida universities are bringing in new presidents, each for a different reason. So what does new leadership mean for Florida A&M, the University of Florida, and Florida Atlantic? Are you an alumnus or a parent of a college student? What does the leadership shakeup in Florida higher education mean to you? Send your questions and comments or leave a voice memo. Email radio@thefloridaroundup.org. I'm Matthew Petty. Join me Friday at noon.
A growing number of empty nesters are getting younger roommates. Could that help the country's housing crisis?
I like saving money. I like having another person to talk to have a relationship with. It's nice to have some companionship when you're at home.
I'm Deborah Becker, the booming Boommates movement. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
The presidential contest heats up with VP Harris rallying in Atlanta and about to announce her own running mate. Donald Trump takes to the stage at the National Association of Black Journalists. Iowa's abortion ban goes into effect. And just how is Team USA doing at the Olympics? It's the Friday News Roundup next time on 1A from WAMU and NPR.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. If you ever drive through the Trout River neighborhood of Jacksonville, you might feel a strange sense of deja vu. Homes that have a strangely similar look, a kind of Florida Art Deco with visible drain pipes, interesting colors. It is one of the strange architectural hidden gems in Jacksonville, and here to talk about it is Dr. Wayne Wood, author and architectural historian. Welcome.
Good morning, Ann. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about the Rathel houses on the Trout River because these are unlike any other grouping of architecture that I know of in this city or any other, really. A man named King Solomon Rathel, what a first name, and his wife Marvell came to Jacksonville from Georgia in the 1920s, and they were both just in their 30s. He had done some blacksmithing and had some building trades work, but there's no evidence that he had any training as an architect or even a builder. And yet during the Depression, King Solomon and his wife Marvell bought a tract of land out on Trout River Boulevard, and between 1935 and 1971, they built 15 or so of these very unusually styled houses that are hard to describe, but are worth a look if you haven't been out there to see them. At the same time going on in architecture, Art Deco was kind of fading into Art Moderne. But down in Miami, they had all of these streamlined deco buildings on Miami Beach that are now quite famous and are a historic district in themselves. So I'm sure Rathel was somewhat influenced by them because the buildings that he and his wife built have rounded corners, stucco walls, flat roofs, and the unusual feature that is in almost every one are the drain pipes that are needed for a flat roof to keep the roof from leaking are actually used as the primary decorative element of the building. So you see this series of little circles protruding from the wall. Those are both drain pipes and the primary decoration of the building.
And they are, I mean, they're interesting looking, but the way that he built them, physically built them, is pretty astonishing too, just in terms of the labor involved. Tell us about the structure of the buildings.
Well, the buildings are made of concrete blocks, and the fact is, it's not known if he had any helpers, but he and his wife did most of the design as well as the construction. The people who lived there said they were always cold. They can never get the house to warm up because, they are just cold concrete blocks, and they're very simple. They don't have the architectural sophistication, both inside or out, of many other buildings in Jacksonville, but they are unique in their similarity. Everyone is different, but they all have similar traits. And the first house they built was in 1935, and the last house that the Rathels built was in 1976. He died in 1971, because he died in 1976 under tragic circumstances.
He took his own life.
He took his own life.
Yeah. And this, when he was building those, you kind of alluded to the fact there wasn't clear that he had much help. I mean, your understanding has been that a lot of this was really just done physically by himself.
King Solomon Rathel and his wife Marvell did most of the construction work, and they would take as long as 2 years to build each house. Then they would live in it once it was finished until they sold it. And so they moved on. Every time they'd build a house, they would live in it and then sell it and move on. And I think one of the great sad parts of the story is that his wife Marvell always wanted a house of her own, and she never got it. And there are some theories that her grief over not ever having her own home was one of the things that led to his suicide.
Is it just recently that these homes have been sort of identified as the unique and special architectural element of Jacksonville? And is there any effort to sort of highlight them or to work on making sure they're preserved?
Well, Glenn Weiss, who is an artist and was for a time worked for the Cultural Council, was the first person to start writing about these. And he called me and said, I got all these houses here and they don't make sense. What do you know about them? And I said, nothing. I've never seen them or heard of them. And so Glenn did quite a lot of research on these houses that discovered some of the family history, and then with other research we did after that, we pretty much got the full story and identified the 15 or so of these houses that still exist in Jacksonville that they built. One of them is in very poor, actually a couple of them are in poor condition and may not make it. My idea would be to form a historic group. The National Register recognizes historic districts where buildings are accumulated together in close proximity. But there's also something called a thematic group, which these buildings would qualify for. Most of them are close together, but even the ones that are scattered around could be part of the recognition on the National Register, which they're, in my opinion, clearly eligible for if someone would take the time to do the research to put them on the National Register. These are not sophisticated grand mansions. They are modest houses, and you might drive by one or two of them and never take much notice. But when you see another one that looks, I think I've seen that one before. This is kind of a strange form of deja vu. And then when you look at all of them and drive around and see them in their place, this is a wonderful collection of one of Jacksonville's most quirky architectural conglomerations.
Yeah, it is super quirky and super fun. And I love that you profile with so many great pictures in your book, Jacksonville's Architectural Heritage. But thank you so much for being here, Dr. Wayne Wood.
Thank you, Ann. I enjoy being here.
And that's our program. Join us Monday when our own Dr. Joe Servin makes a house call to answer your health questions and discuss the latest medical headlines. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. Congaree & Penn, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpenn.com.